Baby June, a 2-year-old child I inherited from my elder sister who is a thorn in my flesh. Every morning begins with his laughter echoing through my small apartment, his tiny hands tugging at anything within reach, and his endless energy turning peace into chaos. Sometimes I stare at him and wonder how such a small being managed to change everything about my life. 2 years ago, before June came into the picture, things were different. My sister, Julie, had introduced a man to our parents and proudly called him her fiancé. She looked so happy that day, but I could tell our parents didn't really like him. There was something about the man they couldn't trust. Maybe his overconfidence, maybe the way he smiled too easily. But Julie, being the stubborn one she's always been, didn't care. A few weeks later, her so-called fiancé decided to host an engagement party. He invited all of Julie's friends and his own, creating this huge event that was supposed to mark their public engagement. The decorations were set, the food was ready, and everyone waited with excitement for the man of the hour to appear. But he never showed up. Julie kept pretending everything was fine, smiling at first, then slowly breaking down as the hours passed. When it became clear that he wasn't coming, she locked herself away for days. I remember watching her cry endlessly, wondering why she was shedding so many tears over a man who wasn't even ready to show up, let alone get married. I couldn't understand why she was holding on so tightly to someone who had humiliated her in front of everyone. Then one night, Julie confessed to me that she was pregnant with his child. I was completely dumbfounded. The words didn't sink in immediately, it felt unreal. I didn't even know how to react. Later, our parents found out the truth and everything fell apart. They were furious and deeply disappointed. They blamed her for being reckless and irresponsible, for trusting a man they never liked. Julie couldn't take the shame and the arguments that followed. Eventually, she packed her bags and moved in with me. I didn't ask questions, I just tried to be there for her. Months went by and finally she gave birth to a baby boy. The moment I saw him, I felt something shift inside me. He was beautiful, tiny, warm, and innocent. And to my surprise, he looked nothing like his father. Instead, he was a charming little replica of Julie, from his nose down to his expressions. For a brief moment I was happy. Felt like a new beginning. But Julie wasn't the same anymore. The heartbreak had changed her completely. She rarely smiled, and every time she looked at her baby, I could see pain in her eyes. She told me once that the child was a mistake, that he reminded her too much of the man who left her behind. I knew she didn't mean it entirely, but her words stayed stuck on my head. After Julie gave birth to June, life became something I had never imagined. A routine built on baby cries, sleepless nights, and an endless list of expenses I could barely keep up with. I wasn't rich, and raising a baby, even if he wasn't mine, was expensive. Diapers, baby formula, hospital bills, baby clothes that he outgrew too quickly. It was like throwing money into a bottomless pit. So I started working part-time jobs wherever I could find them. I delivered groceries in the mornings, washed cars in the afternoons, and worked late nights at a small cafe nearby. Every coin I earned went into keeping that little boy comfortable. There were days I came home exhausted, but one look at June's tiny sleeping face made it worth it. Julie, on her part, worked at a small shipping company across town. It wasn't a high-paying job, but it was something that helped us survive. The problem was she couldn't take June to work with her. So on days when she was busy, she left him with me. I'd strap him to my chest in one of those little carriers and go about my part-time hustle like a single father trying to make ends meet. People would often stare, some with pity, others with admiration, and sometimes I wondered which one I deserved. Then there were days when I had to work extra shifts, and Julie stayed home to take care of him. It was a back-and-forth rhythm. She'd work while I babysat, then I'd work while she babysat. We didn't complain. It was the only way we could manage, and somehow we made it through. Time moved fast. Before we knew it, June was already 2 years old. A lively, mischievous, stubborn little boy, just like his mother. He had this habit of turning the entire house upside down within minutes. I'd clean up his toys, and 2 minutes later, he'd scatter them all again with a proud grin on his face. He loved calling me Daddy. I don't even know where he got the idea, but the first time I heard him say it, I froze. Julie found it amusing and would chuckle, telling him that I was his uncle and not his dad. But June didn't care. He'd still look at me with those innocent brown eyes and repeat it, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. Whenever I took him out, he'd shout Daddy. In public, his little voice echoing through the streets. People would smile, some even complimenting me on how cute my son was. I never corrected them. Maybe because deep down I didn't mind being called that. Funny enough, it was that same word, daddy, that helped me land a job once. I remember walking into a restaurant for an interview, holding June because Julie had an emergency at work. He wouldn't stop calling me daddy in front of everyone. The manager, a woman in her 40s, smiled and said she admired how responsible I was for taking care of my child. I didn't have the heart to tell her the full story. I got the job immediately. Life went on like that for a while. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable. I was proud of how far we'd come, from the nights of crying and confusion to the mornings filled with baby laughter and burnt toast. Then one afternoon, out of nowhere, I received a call from my old friend, Kelvin. Kelvin had always been the ambitious type, the kind of guy who climbed the ladder faster than anyone else. He told me there was a vacancy at the company he worked for, a big firm downtown, and that they needed a new secretary. He said he thought of me first because of how organized I'd always been back in college. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the opportunity like my life depended on it. After everything I had been through, it felt like my chance to finally breathe, to give June a better life, to take some weight off Julie's shoulders. And that was how my new chapter began. The day before my first day at the new company felt like a fresh start, one I had long waited for. For the first time in a while, I stood before the mirror. I had spent nearly all my savings buying a couple of new clothes, crisp shirts, neatly pressed trousers, and a pair of polished shoes. I even decided to style my hair properly for once instead of letting it fall in its usual messy curls. When I was done, Julie looked at me from head to toe and gave a little whistle. She grinned, saying I looked so handsome that even she might fall for me if she didn't know better. It was the kind of compliment that made me roll my eyes, but deep down I couldn't deny it. I did look good. That morning, as I stepped out of the house, baby June waved his tiny hand from the window, his voice echoing behind me with a cheerful, "Bye-bye, Daddy." That alone gave me an extra boost of confidence. I was ready. When I arrived at the company, the tall glass doors reflected the morning sunlight, almost blinding me for a second. Everything about the building screamed success: clean marble floors, expensive furniture, and the faint scent of professionalism mixed with expensive perfume. I took a deep breath and walked toward the reception desk. There were two ladies there, both busy typing on their computers. They barely looked up at first, but when they finally did, their expressions changed instantly. One smiled softly, the other tilted her head as if trying to figure out where she'd seen me before. Then one of them finally said it, that I was very handsome. I couldn't help it. I smiled back, trying to stay composed while also pretending not to notice the way they were still sneaking glances at me. Felt strange, in a good way. After everything I'd been through, a compliment was like a small reward from life itself. I proceeded to call Kelvin. It didn't take long before he appeared, sharp suit, confident stride, and that same grin I remembered from our college days. When he saw me, he stopped in his tracks. His eyes widened for a second, then he broke into a loud laugh. He said that if not for one thing, he would have thought I was some big shareholder in the company, the way I looked so sleek and clean. He even added jokingly that I was going to steal all the girls before he had the chance. I laughed too, shaking my head, but his words made me remember the old days, back in college when I used to have that same kind of attention. Girls would flock around me, giggling over the smallest things, trying to get close just to have me notice them. Some of them even claimed that breathing the same air as me was enough to make their day. It was flattering, but I knew why most of them liked me. I looked good, and that was about it. They were high-class girls from rich homes, always dressed in expensive clothes and smelling like money. I could never afford that kind of life back then. I wasn't poor, but I wasn't in their league either. Still, they'd find reasons to give me gifts or slip money into my hands for lunch, pretending it was nothing. Those were good times, funny ones too, but they belonged to the past. With a small sigh, I came back to my reality, a man standing in the middle of a big company lobby, dressed to impress and ready to start anew. Kelvin led me through the wide hallway, talking about office policies, routines, and a bunch of things that barely registered in my brain because I was still taking in how big the place was. Finally, we arrived at our office. The sound of typing, phones ringing, and soft laughter filled the room. Kelvin cleared his throat and introduced me to everyone as the new secretary. Heads turned, and once again I saw the familiar glances, the curious, interested kind. I smiled politely, trying to look calm. After several minutes of exchanging pleasantries with the other staff, I finally got to sit down. My heart was still pounding from all the introductions, but I managed to keep a calm face. Kelvin, as always, took charge of things. He pulled up a chair beside me and started explaining how everything worked. The files, the computer systems, the schedules, and the rules that kept the company running smoothly. At first, it was a lot to take in, but after a while, I started catching up faster than I expected. It felt surprisingly natural, like I'd been doing this for years. Kelvin was impressed too. He nodded approvingly and said I was doing great for my first day. We'd barely settled into a comfortable rhythm when Kelvin suddenly leaned closer and whispered that the boss would be around soon. He explained that the man had been on a 3-day business trip and would definitely want to see the reports of everything that had happened during his absence. From the way he spoke, it was clear that this boss wasn't someone to take lightly. Kelvin and I immediately got to work. We gathered documents, sorted out files, printed reports, and double-checked every little detail. The atmosphere around the office changed too. A sudden tension filled the air, like a quiet storm building up before lightning struck. People began murmuring and fixing things, straightening their desks and pretending to look extra busy. Then someone at the far end of the office lifted their head and quietly signaled, "He's coming." Within seconds, everyone scrambled into position. Chairs rolled, papers shuffled, and the faint sound of shoes clicking against the marble floor echoed closer and closer. And then the door swung open. A tall man in his late 20s walked in, his steps firm and unhurried. The entire room seemed to shrink under his presence. His face was striking, sharp jawline, clean-cut features, and eyes that held a quiet but commanding intensity. He was handsome, no doubt about it, but there was something about his cold expression that made it hard to breathe for a second. I found myself frozen in place, staring before I could stop myself. I leaned toward Kelvin and whispered, almost under my breath, if that was the boss. Kelvin gave a small nod, his eyes fixed ahead. He murmured, "That's him." Before I could say another word, the boss's gaze shifted, first landing on Kelvin, who was mid-sentence, and then on me. The moment his eyes met mine, it felt like time stopped. He didn't smile, didn't blink, just looked straight at me with that unreadable expression, as if sizing me up, trying to figure out what I was doing there. He started walking toward us. Every step he took echoed loudly in the quiet office. My pulse quickened. I tried to keep a calm face, but my hands felt oddly cold. When he stopped right in front of us, he turned slightly to Kelvin before letting his attention rest on me again. His voice, when he finally spoke, was deep and smooth, but carried a sharpness that demanded respect. He asked if I was new here. I could barely think. My mind went blank the moment his words hit me. His aura was overwhelming. The confidence, the authority, the way he carried himself like the room belonged to him, which of course is. I somehow managed to stammer out a reply, saying yes and quickly introducing myself. But before I could even finish, he raised a hand, signaling for me to stop. The gesture was calm but final, a silent way of saying enough of the formalities. He simply said I should bring my personal information to his desk and then turned around, walking away with that same composed stride. The door to his office closed behind him, and just like that, silence swept through the entire room. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if everyone was still processing the presence that had just filled and emptied the space. I sat back on my seat, still taking in on what had just happened. Kelvin leaned closer to me and whispered that I should never get on the boss' bad side. His voice dropped lower, almost like he was sharing some forbidden secret. He said the boss didn't tolerate carelessness and could fire anyone for the smallest mistake. I turned to look at Kelvin, who was now sipping from his cup of coffee like it was an everyday topic, and he caught my expression immediately. He chuckled softly and said he could tell I was taken aback when the boss walked in. He wasn't wrong. That man had a presence that could silence a room without saying much. Kelvin continued, saying that he had felt the same way the first time he met him. The same shock, the same tension, the same strange fascination. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that almost made me choke on my own coffee. He admitted, quite boldly, that he had a crush on the boss. I nearly coughed out the sip I just took, staring at him wide-eyed. Kelvin only laughed harder, clearly enjoying my reaction. He went on to explain that yes, he did like the boss. Who wouldn't? He was handsome, had a perfectly structured face, an intimidating aura, and that silent authority that made people either respect him or fear him. But Kelvin quickly added that he could never dare to show it. The boss, as good-looking as he was, didn't entertain nonsense. If anyone annoyed him or crossed a line, he wouldn't think twice before showing them the door. I nodded slowly, half amused and half horrified, making a mental note to be extra careful around the boss. A few minutes later, Kelvin handed me a folder and said it was time for me to submit my personal information. He led me down the hallway to the large frosted glass door that bore the name Mr. Russell in sleek silver letters. That was all I knew of him, Mr. Russell. I didn't even know his full name. Kelvin gave me an encouraging pat on the back and whispered, "Good luck," before walking away. I took a deep breath and knocked gently. "Come in," a deep voice said from inside. I opened the door and stepped in. The office was spacious, filled with dark furniture that looked expensive and a faint scent of leather and cologne. Behind the desk sat the boss, the same cold expression on his face as before. But this time there was another man, probably in his mid-30s, sitting across from him, engaged in a serious discussion. I quietly walked forward, placed the folder containing my personal information on the desk, and was about to turn and leave when the boss's voice stopped me. "Wait." I froze immediately. So I waited, awkwardly, while he continued his conversation with the other man. The room was silent except for their low voices, and the clock ticking slowly made every second feel longer than it should. 15 minutes passed before the man finally stood up, shook hands with the boss and left. As soon as the door clicked shut, I turned slightly, not sure if I was supposed to speak first or wait. The boss finally lifted his head and motioned for me to come closer. His expression remained unreadable as he picked up the folder and started flipping through the pages. His gaze moved slowly, scanning each line as if analyzing every detail about me. Then suddenly he stopped reading and looked up. "What's your name again?" he asked, his tone calm but heavy. I blinked, caught off guard. Nathan, sir," I said quickly. He raised an eyebrow. Then he said, his tone slightly sharper, "What's my name?" That question caught me completely off balance. I had not even thought to ask Kelvin about his full name earlier. All I knew was that everyone called him Mr. Russell. Feeling slightly embarrassed, I said, "Mr. Russell, sir?" He leaned back in his chair, clearly unimpressed. "That's my surname," he said, his voice calm but cutting. I could feel sweat forming at the back of my neck. Why did it feel like I was sitting for an exam I didn't study for? I hesitated for a moment, trying to guess if it was a trick question, but his expression didn't give anything away. Then suddenly the corners of his lips curved slightly, not a full smile, more like a knowing smirk. "James?" he said at last, breaking the silence. "James Russell. 29 years old. First son of Mr. Carter Russell." It was the first time I saw a trace of amusement in his face, as if he enjoyed watching me squirm a little. I gave a nervous laugh and shrugged, apologizing for not asking earlier. "I'll remember that next time, sir." He nodded slightly and his face softened just a little. "Good," he said, closing the folder. "You can go back to work now." I exhaled quietly, relieved, and turned to leave. As I walked out of the office, the tension slowly melted away. By the time the day came to an end, I could finally breathe. My first day had been a whirlwind of introductions, and the intimidating presence of Mr. James Russell, my new boss. I barely realized how tired I was until Kelvin offered to drop me off. He parked in front of my apartment and insisted on walking me to the door. Julie was just outside, carrying baby June, who was clapping his hands as soon as he saw me. The moment his eyes caught mine, his face lit up and that sweet little voice echoed, "Daddy." I couldn't help but smile. Julie sighed as usual, shaking her head with that tired smirk. She'd given up trying to correct him. Kelvin laughed softly and said June was adorable before exchanging a few polite words with Julie. Then he waved goodbye and drove off. Julie took June inside while I carried in a small takeout bag from the office, some side dishes I'd managed to get from the staff cafeteria. I handed it to her and she looked genuinely grateful. "You should rest," she said, placing the food on the table. As I slumped into a chair, I started telling her everything that had happened at work. From Kelvin's nonstop chatter to the way everyone seemed to stiffen when James walked by, down to how his piercing stare had practically melted my nerves. Julie listened quietly, then leaned forward and said something that stuck with me. "Be careful, Nathan. Especially with your boss. Men like that, they don't tolerate weakness. Walk with your head up, look confident, and stay focused. Don't let him have any reason to throw you out." Her words sank deep. Maybe it was the older sister tone, or maybe it was because she was right. The following days became a blur of constant work. I learned that being a secretary wasn't just about typing and scheduling meetings. It was about keeping up with a man who seemed to operate on an entirely different time zone. James was always early, always precise, and always watching. I followed him to meetings, took notes, prepared his reports, and somehow I became responsible for his morning coffee. There used to be someone else who did that, but lately James insisted I do it myself. I didn't know why and I didn't dare ask. Maybe he just liked things a certain way. Or maybe he just liked seeing me flustered every morning when I tried not to spill his espresso. One Thursday morning, James called me into his office. He said he had a tight schedule and couldn't attend a meeting at the newly built Royal Crest Hotel. He handed me his business card, something I'd never seen him do for anyone else, and told me to go in his place. "Call me when you get there," he said simply, eyes fixed on some file in front of him. That was it. No detailed instructions, no long speeches, just that. When I arrived at the hotel, I was surrounded by business gurus, wealthy investors, and men who probably had more money in their wallets than I had in my bank account. I greeted them politely, took notes, and made sure everything ran smoothly. At some point, I stepped outside and dialed the number on the card. He picked up after the first ring. His voice was calm, smooth, and commanding as always. I gave him the summary of how things were going, and he just hummed an acknowledgement before saying, "Good work, Nathan. You can head home when you're done." For some reason, hearing that from him made me feel proud of myself.